Good
Hey.
morning, good afternoon, hello Eric, and good evening, good night to everyone wherever you maybe are, somewhere across our lovely world. Thanks so much for joining us yet again for Serverless Office Hours. It's our new channel. It's a bunch of new and additional channels. It's a slightly different time, an hour later, so wherever you are, thanks so much for joining us. I'm Julian, and I'm joined again by the wonderful Eric. How are you, Eric?
I'm good. How are you? Cheers.
Yes, very good, thank you. I'm on the boring side. I am just on the water over here.
My
It's
Diet
late for
Dr.
me,
Pepper.
exactly. So yeah, we've back streaming. It is super cool. Appreciate all the people who joined us last week, where we spoke all about all the cool goodies that came as part of reInvent. So a really good place to look at that is on the AWS Events channel on the YouTube as Eric always says,
You all
I
right?
speak for a living. With AWS Events YouTube channel. And so AWS Events YouTube channel will have Serverless Office Hours and all the other great live streams. So last week's is up on there, which is lots of cool stuff. But this week we are diving a little bit deeper into one of the cool parts of what we spoke about last week, and a whole bunch of cool new things from Step Functions. So right. Eric's going to tell us all about that. But please remember, we are here live on Office Hours. So please send us your questions, send us your comments. We love to hear from where you are. We last week we had a bunch of people literally from all over the world. So it's an absolute pleasure to know where you're from and maybe what you're working on, and tell us what you think about Step Functions. But yeah, Eric, just the high level as we start. What's new with Step Functions?
Well, first of all, let me tell you, just so you know, I'm coming out of Colorado and Julian's coming out of London. So I mean, we're already spanning the globe here. As far as Step Functions, first of all, if you're not familiar with Step Functions, we'll get into that. But Step Functions is a workflow orchestration service. I mean, it allows you to kind of say, do this, then do this, or look at do some logic, if this, then this, that kind of thing. And it really helps you. I don't know about you, Julian, but while my title is developer advocate, I'm not the strongest developer in the world. This if then switches, all that kind of stuff, I struggle with that. So state machines or workflows allow me to kind of do some things, like error handling and choices and things like that without having to code for all of that. And so there's a lot of strength here. And there's some new things that came out, and we're going to kind of jump into that in a second. But three things we're going to talk about, maybe 2.5, depends on how far we get. But we're going to talk about JSONata. You know what JSONata is, Julian?
It's something to do with JSON.
There it is. There it is.
I went to school with a JSON.
Done. We can move on. JSONata is a JSON querying language. It is open, third party, open source, and you'll see it here. And the other is variables. I'm going to more explain that, but it allows you in Step Functions. It used to be if you wanted to store something, or if you wanted to access something that came into the step function, and then maybe you're like 5 or 6 states down, you had to pass it down each one. And to be honest, that was a little frustrating. So we've gotten rid of that. We've actually made a lot of changes. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen, and we'll dive in unless you've got anything else you want to throw out there.
No, and just JSONata, this isn't an AWS kind of thing. JSONata is a JSON Wrangler thing, JSONata.org, super cool stuff. I mean, JSON is just so critical to so many workloads, and literally just wrangling and moving data around is probably half the job of most developers, whether that's putting input to an API or retrieving something from an API or that kind of thing. So yeah, JSONata is super important, and this is why it's so cool that JSONata, which is very feature rich, which Eric is going to show partly, is all available in Step Functions.
Yeah. We're going to jump in. The third thing, if we have time, so this is kind of a variable in itself. If we have time, we're going to talk about private endpoints and being able to reach them from Step Functions. And we'll kind of get into like VPC and outside of VPC, or in an AWS managed VPC, kind of all that if we get to it. So that's kind of that's a whole ball of wax in itself. So we'll get jumping on that. Again, post on here where you're coming from. We love knowing where people are watching from. And let's get started. So if you've never seen Step Functions, this is the Step Functions console inside of AWS. It's not very exciting yet, so because we're just looking at a list of Step Functions. But I'm going to go ahead and create a new state machine so we can start looking at variables and such. Now, in this, I'm going to create from blank. And I'm going to go ahead and just name this I'll tell you what we're going to do in a second here. So we'll call this migrate step function. And then I'm going to do a standard. Now, with Step Functions, I have two types of machines. It can be a standard, which has all the bells and whistles and step functions, and an express, which has a subset of those. But they run differently. Standard can be around for a year, 1 year. I mean, that's not a typo. And express functions only run up to 5 minutes, but they run in memory, so they're really fast, right? So if you're not familiar with that, my general rule is I start in express and move to standard when I need it. However, because I'm not going to set up all the logging stuff, or I don't want to set up all the logging for express right now, I'm going to do standard because it'll come with the logging out of the box, and then we can switch back to later. So either way, that works. So we'll go ahead and set up.
And also, just on the Express, it's cheaper. So Express workflows is, can be orders of magnitude cheaper. So if any workflow is synchronous and can run in under 5 minutes, use Express. You're going to save money. It's going to be faster. Win-win.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It is cheaper and is great. Now, normally, when we would build a step function, we would do, or before reInvent, it would come up and JSON path would be your only option. And when you do JSON path, if I look at something, and I don't know if it'll let me switch back, but let's just drag a Lambda function in here. When I'm doing JSON path, hang on a minute here. I may have, let me go back to the config here. All right, we're going to have to back out and do that again. Here, let's do it this way, because I thought I'd set JSON path, maybe I didn't. So we're going to go back in here, create state machine, migrate. But JSON path is not the default anymore. It used to default to that, but now the default is JSONata, and we'll leave it there. So, all right, so if I go in here, and I've got JSONata. Now, the idea here, what we're going to build is I've got this database. This isn't the actual one. This is a copy of it. But this database has all of the links from this URL shortener that we use called S12D. And they're assigned to users, user 1 at Amazon.com, user 2, and user 3. And this is how this works. As Amazonians put in short links that they want to do, we get these, we get these links and stuff. And so when someone leaves, sometimes we have to change the ownership. So I need to do some kind of migration against the database where I walk through. I have to handle pagination and things like that. And I walk through it and I change the email. So I pass it the old email address and I change it to the new email address. I got to call the primary key and change that out. So we're going to actually build that out real quick today. To see how that works. And then during that, I'll be showing some JSONata and variables and why and when they make sense. So let's jump in this and get started. So the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead. The very first thing I want to do is I want to pull a list of data from DynamoDB. So I'm going to actually say DynamoDB. And you can see here it lists the different things. And what I want to do is I want to do a query. So, and I can actually, I can just do a query here and it'll usually find it real quick. So I'm going to drag that in. Now, let's just get rid of this for a minute. What's that? Oh, that is good catch. That would have been really annoying later. So let's bring that back out down here.
And, while Eric's just grabbing that, this is using Step Functions SDK integrations, where literally, I don't know, it's 12, 13,000 now, probably even more. So everything you can do with the Amazon, the SDKs, with AWS SDKs is available natively in Step Functions. So anything to do with, query, update, delete, across anything from, databases to VPCs to anything you can do with the SDK, Lambda functions, anything you can do in Step Functions. So yeah, super powerful.
That's right. Yeah. And that's, I remember when we switched over to using the SDK and I'm like, this is just genius. Absolute genius. Absolutely love it. Okay. So what I'm not going to do is make you watch me type. So I've got I'm going to pop some things here and then explain them so that you can see. Now, if you remember, our DynamoDB table is literally called S12D. So I'm going to pass in, this is the arguments that I need to talk to the DynamoDB. So I'm going to pass in the table name, the index name, because I actually have an index that's based on the owner, and an expression where the owner has to equal the owner. And what that means, if this is a little confusing, this is DynamoDB kind of terminology, or it's the language with DynamoDB. And so we use a thing called expression attribute names and expression attribute values. This allows us not to use reserved names. So what I'm saying is the owner will equal, and this is my first appearance of JSONata. Now, normally what I would have done is I would have used JSON path, and I would have said the incoming value would have something on it called old owner. In this, I'm going to say it's also the first appearance of a variable. We have reserved variables, and if I want to grab the states.input.oldOwner, this says the incoming data that came into the states. I want you to grab the input, and I want you to find old owner, and that'll be the name of it. Now, in order to use JSONata, I wrap it in this curly Q percentage signs. So that tells the step functions parser that this is JSONata. Run it through JSONata there. And so what this is going to do is this is going to grab the old owner, and it's going to look up, and it's going to query for all the records owned by the owner in here. Okay, so that's the first thing we're going to do, and that'll bring it back, and that'll bring that data back. Now, the next thing we want to do is we'll add some different choices in there in a little bit. And Julian, I can't see the screen, so if we have any questions coming in, feel free to interrupt me. Yeah, glad to jump over. So, okay, so the next thing we're going to do is I want to actually we're going to talk about variables for a minute and how you assign them. I want to actually assign a variable here. This first query is going to grab a paginated version or one page of DynamoDB records. So I want to save that because I'm going to add to that later. Now I can pass this down. I can say, okay, always output it. And the next one I have to grab it and output it. So you're kind of passing down the chain, but I may not need it at all the steps. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to save the results as a variable. So I'm going to go into our definition here. I'm going to go over to the variables, and I'm actually going to save a couple of things that make life easier for me. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to save these records. Now, it's important to understand, and I have a whole video on this, and we'll find it and post it here, but it's important to understand when to assign variables. You can't assign variables coming into a state, right? So variables are assigned after a state is run. So if you need something in this, like the DynamoDB query, I would have to have a state in front of it. So always remember that when you're assigning variables, they're assigned after the state is run. And that's very important because a lot of times if you're wanting to assign a variable that you're also going to use in the state, then you have to assign it as a variable and know how to reference it in the arguments and outputs. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a record or an array called records. And where we're going to grab that from is we'll actually have that coming in. And I want to actually type this because I want you to see this. Actually do my percentage sign so it knows it's JSONata. All right. So now typing. This is why I don't type very often because it's painful to watch. But we have states, and you can see here. I'm going to hit dot. Oh goodness, Eric, Julian, are you cringing? I can't see you.
You're good.
All right.
You're good.
Okay,
I'll never say live coding is going to be I'll do any better. So
yeah. I got two fingers, and I'm the worst fat finger on the planet. So all right. So with states, you have three reserved variables. You have input, context, and results. Input is actually what came in. Context, you can get a lot of different things. Input is input into the state. Through the context, you can actually get an input to the entire workflow and other data, timing, ID, different things like that, and then the results from this. All right, so what we want is states.input, so what's coming in here, and then we're going to assign, or we're going to grab items. So we have the items coming out of DynamoDB are going to be in the states result, or I'm sorry, we want results. There we go. Because remember, I said it's after. So when we're making that call, we get the results, and those are the items. All right. Now we're going to add two more things, and I won't make you watch me type these, but I wanted to show how the IntelliSense worked. It's very handy. So you can actually click on that as well. So let me do a comma here. So the other two things we want is we want a new owner, and we want an old owner. And what this is saying is, the new what it was, the record was the old owner, and what we're going to change it to the new owner. All right, so those will be assigned as variables, and I've got an error here.
Is it result or results?
Result. Yeah, you're right. Good call. Hang on a second here. Dot. No, it's results. Dot. Goodness.
Oh, you don't have a colon after records.
Yeah, hang on a second. Dot. result. It is dot, and it's 1, and it is items. Yeah. Okay. Oops. That should fix it. Oh my gosh, this is horrible.
And after
what did you say? We need a colon after what?
Yeah, you've got a dot after.
There it is. Good call. Good call. So painful. All right, so you can see the console is very handy. It's going to show the errors. I won't do a lot more of that, so we can see that. Now we can actually test this state. So we can go in here and we can put in old owner, new owner, and we can test it, and it'll actually call. We haven't created our role yet, so I'm going to hold off on that right now. But when we actually save this out and create it, then we'll be able to test that. Okay. So the next step we're going to do, and this is just me being safe. I know that when I'm going to automate things, I want to make sure that we back up the table, right? I'm a big stickler on creating a backup, and I only need to do it if I'm going to do it. Later, I'll add basically a condition that says, hey, if you didn't get any records back, then just kick out and end this workflow. But for now, we're going to go ahead, and if you did get records, then let's create a snapshot of what the database looks like at the moment before we go through and change this. And that has been a huge help for me. So I have blown the table away a couple times. So let me show you how I'm going to do that. So in the create backup, in the arguments, and we'll kind of minimize this so you can see it better here. We need a backup name and a table name. So I'm going to use some more JSONata here. I'm going to use concatenation here, and I'm going to add milliseconds. So I can say S12D dash and then milliseconds, and that'll give us a date, and that gives me a backup name. And then I know the table name. So it's that quick and easy. So again, using JSONata to do that, I don't have to use. Normally, I might have had to export or eject to a Lambda function to get a date and time or some formatting, or I would have had to dig through the context trying to grab it from somewhere else. But here in JSONata, I can just use this JSONata function at millisecond, and there we go.
Cool. So okay. Also, I know with step functions before, there were these mini little intrinsic functions that used to do, you could generate UIDs and do like basic JSON parsing, and then you had to jump to a Lambda function to do that. So this seems as though you don't need the intrinsic functions anymore. Obviously, you can probably remove a bunch of Lambda functions, and it's just all in JSON. Right. Okay.
That's right. We've had some folks post that they switched over to JSON. They were able to remove a lot of Lambda functions that were just doing minor things like creating UUIDs or stuff like that. There's a JSONata equivalent of all the intrinsic functions. And in fact, we've added a couple too, just to make sure that we have everything. And we can post the link to that in the videos, but it shows all of that. But yes, the intrinsic functions are now easily handled in JSONata. All right. So the next thing we want to do, now that we've got our backup, the next thing we want to do is we want to go ahead and start processing these. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a map state, and I want to say for each record in this items array, I want to do something, right? And so the first thing we need to do is we need to tell these map state where I'm just going to do an inline. I could do this distributed where I spun up a bunch of nested step functions, but inline is fine for what we're doing here. I don't want it to work with the root. I actually know exactly where that's located. And so it's the same thing here. We're going to be passing this right there, states.inputs.items. Okay, so that's the items coming into this record. I've also saved those. I could use the variable too. I've also saved that out there, but I want to just work with the current set of items. So that's where I'm gonna grab these. Okay, so with that.
So is this going to have the set of items, or is it going to be the response from the backup? So it looks like
this is going to be. So this will get. Hang on just a minute here. Let me make sure that I haven't missed anything. So one thing I need to do, and this is where I am going to pass something in the backup. That was a good catch, Julian. On the outputs, I want to pass that input.
Okay. So
Okay, good call. That was a good catch. So, and I was just coming to that as well. I was like, that doesn't make sense. All right. So by doing that, it's going to take those, and then it's going to pass to the next one, just the records we have. So the backup is basically just something we do, and then we move on as if it never existed. So the map state will get those inputs that came from, or the items that came from the query. So good catch. then we're actually going to take here. So let me go back down here. So in our output here, let's start with our input actually. Hang on a second here. In the map state itself, so we're going to add what it's going to do in just a minute, but we're going to also pass those on as well. So the information that came in, we're going to push the output, and I'll show why we're doing that a little bit later. But we can move on from there. Okay, so now what do we want to do inside the map state? Well, we want to update that record. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and grab the DynamoDB, and we're going to do update record. Hold on a second here. It's an update item. So it's right here. So I'm going to grab this and drop it in. Julian, that's DynamoDB. You're checking my back here.
I got you.
Because I'm not always, yeah, exactly. All right. So then what we're going to do with this is there's a couple things. So first of all, let me just grab the data and I can walk through it real quick here. Hang on a second. Okay. So in the arguments, so in here, in the arguments, and let's just move this out of the way so we can see it. We'll go ahead and, all right. So there's a couple things I'm going to do. So the first thing I'm going to do is I know table name. I'm going to read as S12D. The key name is found in the states.input.id. So I'm looking up this particular item that came in, so I'm grabbing that. Okay. The update expressions, I'm going to set the owner to the new owner. And I'm going to also set the field updated at to current date. Again, I have my attribute names and attribute values that map to that. And then the current date, I'm going to use a different time. I'm going to use now, and that's another JSONata function, right? So now, one thing to note is I grabbed the new owner, because that's what I need. I grabbed the new owner from the variables that I had set earlier. Right. I know the owner is going to, I don't need that so much because I'm grabbing the ID to grab which record it is. But now I'm going to update it with the new owner from the variable new owner. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So you sent the input from the very beginning of the state machine. You're storing that, the new owner as that variable.
That's exactly
and here and then you're pasting it in.
I stored that here. You can see in variables, I stored new owner here. I'll use old owner a little bit later. So in here, I'm going to go ahead and write that. I'm grabbing the ID because in this input, so it changes. This input is getting the full items record. This input is just getting that one record. So states.input.id maps to that one record and the ID of that record. All right. So that will take and update that record. Now, when we're done, then what we need to do is we're going to look for pagination, okay? So we need to know, hey, are there more records in the database that that we're checking for? And you can tell up here when I queried the DynamoDB, I limited it to only 50 records so that we could see. You can grab a lot more than that, but so that we could see pagination, I limited that to 50. Okay, so when we come down here, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to do it's in a flow state. So we're going to do a choice, right? So I'm going to, it's getting where I can't see everything. Give me a second here. All right, so I'm going to do a choice. And I'm going to stop there for a minute. Julian, do we have any questions coming in, or does anybody have any questions?
We did our good friend Alpa Codes was talking a little earlier when can you use the test state to check JSONata function results?
So you... Not specifically the JSONata. So yes, is the short answer to that. The JSONata is in that state, and it's going to test the state as a whole. I just want to make sure I'm not misunderstanding your question. Say, would it evaluate your JSONata itself? No, it checks the state as a whole. And so it is, in a sense, evaluating the JSONata to make sure the whole thing works.
Yeah, no, thanks, Alpacodes, for joining us. And also remember the test state has an API. So you can also, programmatically test your step function state machines via an API, as you would in a sort of traditional full code way. So that's it on the questions. Yeah, right. Send us your questions if you want. We did have Aditya Shivam. Thanks for joining us via Facebook. AWS services are just amazing. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah. All right. So let me jump back over here. So in this choice state, what I'm doing is I need to look and see if a pagination record exists. So what that looks like is DynamoDB will actually send out in the input, and this is the input to the state itself. It'll have what's called a last evaluated key, meaning, hey, I grabbed 50, and this is the last one I grabbed, and there are more to be grabbed. If that doesn't exist, then there are no more to be grabbed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and in my rule here, I'm going to say my condition. Again, I'm going to use JSONata. I'm going to use a JSONata function called exists. And I'm going to say states.input.lastEvaluatedKey, right? And if you remember, the map passed that input down. So it said, hey, here's the array of items I got into the map, and I'm passing that through to this choice state to decide whether, there are more or not. Okay, so once we do that, and let me make sure I've got everything else here covered. So we'll say what we're going to do is we're going to drop a new state in there. And what we're going to do is we're going to do another DynamoDB query. So let's go back to our actions. DB query here, and it's going to look very similar to the one we did above, right? Because we're doing the same thing. So we're just going to grab all the same information here. Okay. So we grab that. But the thing we're going to do is we're going to add the exclusive start key, meaning this is the last one we grab. So we know we're going to tell DynamoDB the next one we get is, we want to grab starting from that record. So it'll actually go to the last one, step to the next one, and move on. Okay. Now, the last thing we're going to do is we're going to actually in here, I'm going to move this over because it's very crowded. We're going to update our variable. Okay, because remember, we're trying to keep a track of all the items. We're keeping a full array of these. So how we're going to do that is we're going to say, okay, we're going to update this variable of records. And we're going to say, I want you to append, I'm using the JSONata, append to the array records that we already know, the states.result.items. So we're grouping this. I've built this particular workflow before, and when you had to do it in JSON path, this was a series of past states and funky JSON path and banging my head against that wall. It was frustrating. When I found this little tidbit, I even tweeted about it. I was so excited. This was the coolest thing ever. So
and I remember people also saying that you said there were multiple path states, and each state you pay for as well. So being able to do this in one line, obviously, first of all, it looks easier and it makes sense, and it looks as though it's going to be code. I mean, this is the kind of code you would write, and you're not having to hack this with multiple path states and then pay for each state transition as well.
That's right. That's exactly right. So and so that made life a lot easier. Okay, so when we're done with this, then what we need to do is we need to actually go to the next. So on the DynamoDB, and let me just set this real quick here in the configuration. We're actually going to tell it to go back to the map. So up here is where this map state map. So we're going to say, okay, here when you get that data, then you go back here. Okay. So now, see what's happening is we're doing this loop until all the records, and we'll update our names in a few minutes to kind of clean this up. We doing okay on time, Julian?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay. All right. So we're just going to loop around until we're happy. All right. So that'll take care of that. Now, when we're done, then I am going to do a pass state, because this becomes really handy. Move this stuff around here. So I'm going to do a pass state, because one of the things I want a record of everything. I basically want a change log, right? So I want to know every record that was changed. So how am I going to do that? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the pass state. I'm going to go to let me bring it back over here. And I'm going to use the output. And I'm going to say, and I'll just paste this. I'm going to try to impress anybody that I'm doing this from memory. What I'm doing is I'm saying my change set, I can say that. I'm going to take the records after it's been appended to, and I'm going to say, and then I'm going to map through those. So records dot, and then I give it a structure, and I want the ID of the record being changed. I want the old owner, and I want the new owner. So that gives me a change set of all the changes we made. And that's the raw step function. I'm going to go ahead and save this. Let's see if we get a bunch of errors or not. Any questions so far on this?
No, we're good. We've got some questions, unfortunately, in non-English languages, in my non-English language speaking. Yeah.
All right. So what I'm going to do here, when I save it, DynamoDB or Step Function says, oh, hey, you are talking to some different services. We're going to go ahead and create the policies. We've read this, and we see you need to be able to query. You need to be able to create backup. You have some get, put, update, and delete items, so CRUD on DynamoDB, and then some standard X-ray stuff that we use for tracing. I like all this, so I'm going to go ahead and confirm this.
So that is super cool, because it's using the SDK. It knows exactly what calls you're going to use to which services, and then can just infer the permissions. Nice.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So, okay, so let's try this and see if it works. Just to, and then we'll clean it up a little bit. So we're going to execute this once. And the data that it needs is we got to pass a new owner and an old owner. So in my data, I'm going to say new owner is, and I have 3 users in there. So we're going to change, let's say user, we're going to go to user 15. I don't know. I'm very clever in my naming. Okay. .com. All right. So, and the user that it's being changed from, the old owner, is going to be, I know we have a record in there for user 1 at Amazon.com. Okay. You're welcome to email these people if you want, but it will probably not get anywhere. Okay. So that should be, let me validate that real quick here and make sure that I've got my proper data that's coming in. I think just old owner and new owner should be fine. Yep. Okay. So that should be enough. So let's go ahead and start that execution. And we got a fail. Let's take a look why. Okay. So it's not authorized to perform. No. Okay. So what it's saying is not authorized to DynamoDB query, but we told it to do a query. That's all right. We can fix that. So what I'm going to do now, normally I would do this on, oh no, you know what? It said I probably needed to manually update that. So that's okay. Normally I would do this through IAC. I would have SAM or CDK, and I would have these roles already in place. But we can't at this on this one. So let's go ahead and edit the state machine. And I'm going to go into the config. And here's the role that I'm doing. So I'm going to go ahead and view this in IAM. All right, that takes to a new window. And I'm going to look at its... all right, so here's the content, or here's what it can do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and edit this. And I'm going to add the 2 permissions that I needed. So one is DynamoDB. Oh, you know, I think I pasted the whole thing. Yeah, so hang on a sec. Query. And then let's take that and we're going to do DynamoDB create backup. So I like it that we're working with least privileges here. So create
good job,
backup. Eric. What's that?
Eric, I don't have to have the security disciplinary stick.
Yeah, this wouldn't be my first one. Yeah, step 2, step 2 happening. So yeah. All right. So, and we're not actually deleting any items, so we can get rid of that. And we're only updating item and get item and query, but we'll leave it for the moment so that Julian has grounds for my dismissal. So, all right. So we'll go ahead and save this, and we'll save the change. So now we can go back to our step functions, and let's try that again. So we're going to get, okay, Eric, come on. So we'll go back to our design, go back to our executions, and rather than having to type all that all over again, let me just bring up the same execution, and we'll do a new execution from that. So there's my data. Let's try that. Oh, we're still getting some. Okay. Oh, it's the index. Okay. Yeah, we can fix that. Okay. Yeah. So what it's doing is we're querying against the index. Eric, I'm talking about myself in third party. Eric didn't think that through. So, okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our resource here. So how we're going to do that is we're going to say, okay, we want to be able to do it to S12D, the table itself, and with a comma, of course. Okay, and we're going to do a star, like so. All right, we happy with that, Julian?
Yep. And for people to look at that and go, oh, that's a star, that means the whole table. It just means all the indexes and things on that individual table.
That's right. That was not near as broad as it may have seemed. So we'll go back to this execution. We'll just start an execution here. Oh, look at that. Okay, so now we're creating the backup. Now we're working through those. We did one pass through here. So now in my pass here, you can see this is the input. So it got all these records, but I wanted a cleaned up change set. So I'm going to come down here, and there's my change set.
Oh, cool.
And there you go. And that's using variables and JSONata to build that out. Now, time-wise, I'm going to see if we have any questions. If we don't, we can look at private endpoints.
Cool. So also we do have a Lego Toadetto. Thanks for joining us via Twitch. Lovely name. Is it limiting resource scope in those generated IAM policies, or is it passing in star for the resource? So yeah, that's what we covered before. It is sort of the sub of the resource. So that particular DynamoDB table, only that one, but all bits of that DynamoDB table, which includes the indexes as well. So obviously you could limit that even further to specific indexes and that kind of thing. But generally for a small database, there's no need. Remember, it's not full admin access to the database. It would be like in SQL having all views of a table, for example. And then also, yes, sorry, Karen, Eric.
I like this statement. Until he gets to the next access error and the policy turns into that's a fair statement, but I won't do that because people would come downstairs here and grab me and take me to IAM jail. But no, really. So we actually pride ourselves in not using those stars. But man, when you're developing, sometimes it's like But yeah, that's fair.
Yeah. And then, Dimitri, thanks for joining us via YouTube. Is this functionality available under AWS Amplify settings? I'm not quite sure what you're referring to, or which functionality. So yeah, please send us another comment of what you specifically.
Let me take a whack at this.
Yeah.
So so because it's step function, so you don't create, and it depends on if you're talking Gen 1, Gen 2. I'm going to talk Gen 2 for the moment. So you don't create step functions directly in Gen 2. You're going to use it in the extended CDK. So you're going to create your step functions in a CDK, and then yes, all of this is available. So you can create your step function. You have JSONata, you have paths, you have the private endpoints that we're going to talk about, and that's all available through Amplify. And you can use step functions in your backend for an Amplify. So
cool. And then lastly, thanks Frank for joining us via LinkedIn. Step functions, choose the red or blue pill. Absolutely.
Right.
which one are you?
Sorry, I should do this. That was kind of rude. I apologize. So okay. Hello, Gord. Fab. Yeah, I can't even. I'm afraid to say it out loud.
Thanks for joining us, Fud.
Okay. All right. So the next step on this, just so you know, is I would go through and I would name. And let me just show one part of that. We won't go through all of it, but if I go back to the step function, what I would start doing is in here. I would start naming these logical steps like get first data set. Right. And then I would say create backup. That's pretty self-explanatory. Process.
You're on the backup one.
So so this just helps to name them. So you cut. Oh yeah, thank you. Create backup. This helps to name them. So one thing you'll notice if you watch me at all, I look down when I type because I don't have where are the button fingers, So I look down, so it never fails that I'm in the wrong place, and Julian has to go, Eric, you're in the wrong place. So that's how it works. So there you go. So we'll go process.
Same again, Eric.
Did it again? I clicked on the other one. All right, we'll just escape out of that. All right, so we're gonna say, it's giving me all kinds of grief now. There we go. We'll stay there. Okay, so anyway, I would go through that. The other thing I could do is I could put a choice state right here and said, hey, if there's no records, then we just go right to exit. So there you go. There's your step function. That's the working version. So let's jump over.
But I mean, just looking at this as well, you've got no function code. Okay, there's a whole bunch of configuration code, but they're basically DynamoDB SDK calls. There's no patching. There's literally, once this goes, this will keep running forever because there's literally nothing. There is nothing that will ever get out of date with this. I mean, I say ever in the long kind of term, unless we go to Step Functions version 2 or whatever. But yeah, this is the kind of thing when we talk about configuration over code, which is a concept of being able to use SDK configuration without having to run a Lambda function with a runtime and everything. I think, yeah, this is what's also super powerful, that this is just going to run. You've got all your error handling, your logging, everything built in, and you don't have to run any code to do this.
That's right. So I'm just showing the error handling. I can add different catches that I want, and I can add, timeouts, heartbeats, a lot of things that we have to write a lot of boilerplate code for it's handled right inside of Step Functions. All right. Shall we move on?
Yeah, let's go. Yeah, well, just quick comment from via Twitch again from Coffee Sam. Thanks. Yeah, are all these features also available in GovCloud? I don't think so yet, but I mean, I could be incorrect on that, but definitely. And just to know, internally, our teams are, super keen on getting these things rolled out to as many partitions as possible. So yeah, these kind of things will be coming to GovCloud. Just takes a bit more work just to make sure that all everything is done for GovCloud as well. So I can't say for sure, but I don't think quite initially, but I'm sure it'll be coming soon.
Yeah, the fastest way to check on this is create a new step function and see if JSONata is available. Yeah. So there you go. Okay, so let me close all these other tabs. Okay, are you ready to move on?
Yeah, cool. So we've obviously built a whole state machine, but the thing to cover as well is the global variables that you took stuff in the beginning, and you could reference that new owner, from the beginning. You didn't have to, because previously what you had to do is you had to pass that through each individual state, go on, and you get this long, deliberately long JSON blob that would be huge, and then eventually, at the last bit, you'd look at that. Now it's just a variable, and then also obviously the JSONata for dramatically simplifying your JSON parsing.
Yep. What he said. Okay. So the next thing I'm going to show you, and we're actually going to dive a lot deeper into this. So we're going to, I think, are we 1 or 2 sessions away from that?
Yeah, 2 weeks time.
Yeah, I'm going to give you a high level on this. So I don't know how deep we'll go on this, but we're going to cover it in depth later. But one of the things, so we're seeing a lot of ECS, serverless container use as well, right? So people are using Lambda for this and container for this, and they're using them together. The thing about it is Lambda's functions. I almost said Lambdas. Sorry, Chris Munns. Lambda functions sit in an AWS managed VPC, and that you can access them. You can call them from step functions, that kind of thing. But when we want to use ECS, you put them in your VPC, and that's a good thing. You want to be able to secure yours in a VPC. And sometimes we have need where, it has to be a private endpoint. There's no public access. There's no the ALB. That's what we're using here. The ALB can't call the internet, and the internet can't call this ALB. But we still want to be able to use that endpoint from a Lambda function. Now, how would you normally do that, Julian?
You would connect your VPC to a Lambda, your Lambda function to a VPC. If you needed outbound connectivity as well, you needed to then have a NAT gateway or some other kind of thing to get out of that VPC to get everything. Yeah, I mean it's fine. Yeah, it's good. But there's a lot of networking configuration.
Yeah, and now I'm going to throw out the but, and this is that's all nice and good, but we don't like to use Lambda functions when we don't have to. We love Lambda functions for transforming data, for business logic, but if all it's doing is routing, then it's an unneeded cost. It's an unneeded, transport layer that isn't. So we felt, there's a better way to do this, and we actually have a blog coming out on this later this week, and a video that I'll walk through this. But we wanted to do a highlight. We want to throw out the proxy, and we want to allow step functions to talk directly to the API endpoint, the private.
So was that before? Because step functions couldn't talk directly to a VPC, hence you needed the proxy Lambda function. So
That's right. You had to
that's
call a
change.
Lambda function, a proxy. 99% of the time, it was a Lambda function, and to make this work. So we want to go ahead and we want to do that without. Now, one of the cool things, I'm going to show you this. I don't know if you've seen this, and I'm going to watch our time here. I have a VPC out here. Let's see if this comes up. Okay. So I have a link. I have a private endpoint called ecs.slip.link. So this is just my, it's a host that I have, right? So I need a custom domain name for this. So I'm going to actually curl that. So curl slip, HTTPS slip dot, oh, come on, Eric. ecs.slip.link. Now watch what happens. Goodness, good night. All right, here we go. Okay, so it kind of holds up here. So it's not hidden. And that's actually as expected because my Cloud Shell is not inside my VPC and it's sitting out there. It shouldn't be able to reach this endpoint. Now, one of the cool things is if you actually do this and you add a -v, so we do a verbatim like so, you can see that it does resolve. Right, so we get an endpoint because you use a public zone and a public domain name, but it's not a public endpoint, right? So that's something to understand. We are working so this works with private domain and private zones later, but not at the case. But I wanted to show this. Now, here's something really cool. I actually have a Cloud Shell that I created in the VPC. I don't know if you knew you could do that, but you can actually create a Cloud Shell in the VPC. So we're going to say curl, and then we're going to add a header. Because in this, I actually require a header. So it's X API key is, don't laugh at me. This is my, yeah, okay. Don't laugh, Julian. That's high security right there. That's another reason Eric should go. So, all right, we're going to go HPS and then ecs.slip.link. Oh, missing API key. I probably did the, because it's X API key, not C. But it hit my back end. There you go. So if you didn't know this, I like to show this. You can actually, because what would we have to do before? We would have to actually set up a bastion, right? We would set up a bastion in the VPC to talk to it, and that's a real pain in the rear. So we actually can use a cloud VPC or a Cloud Shell, VPC Cloud Shell to do that. All right, so let's get rid of this. Let's, what's that?
Cloud Shell is cool for this, yeah.
It is. Yeah, it's super cool. It's super helpful if you're not using it. It's great. All right, so let me go ahead and show. So here's our stack. That's the stack I just hit. We've got these listeners on 443. Our ECS is set up. It's got an ALB in front of it. It's all ready to go. Now we want to call it from API Gateway. Well, I can't do it directly.
API Gateway or Step Functions?
Yes, I said Step Functions. You heard Step Functions. Yes, so many services we work with in here. Thank you for correcting me, Julian. Julian's here as a monitor. I mean, he's good, but he's also just a big monitor. So, all right. So we're going to go over, and I'm going to introduce you to two new features of VPCs. So let's open this up. And the first one is, and we can go down to our VPC. Right down here under private lattice and private link and lattice, there's two things called resource gateways and resource configurations. And this is the magic that's going to make this happen for us. So the first thing I'm going to do, and I'm doing this all from memory, so there might be we might have an error or not. So I don't have any cheat sheet for this one. So let's see how it works. So we're going to create a resource configuration. And you create a resource configuration for each service that you're sharing. Time-wise, I'm going to go a little faster because we're around here. So now you can see I can do different things. I'm going to do an IP address or DNS address. So TCP. I'm sorry. We need to create the gateway first. That was my bad. So let's go. We're going to go resource gateway right here and create a resource gateway. The resource gateway name is going to be ecs.rg. That's a name I'm pulling. I know if I look under here, I want the private subnets. So I'm going to do subnet. Here we go. Yes, was 2. Hang on a sec. Here we go. Yep, there we go. Okay, so you'll see. Now I've picked the wrong VPC. That's why. There we go. All right. So this is the VPC that I know my app is in. Now when I check in here, you'll see I've got the public and the private. That was weirding me out. So there's the private here. I have a private here. You'll notice under these, I don't have anything configured. So obviously I'm not going to check those. So it's those two. For security, I'm going to use the ALB, and I'm going to do them both there. just so we know we can get there. I don't have anything else. I'm going to take that as default. So now I've created my resource gateway, right? So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and go to a resource configuration, and I'm going to create a resource configuration. And I'm going fast, but don't worry, we're going to go in depth on this later, but so you can see it. So in this, I'm going to attach it to the resource gateway I just built. It's going to be a DNS resource, and it's going to be ecs.slip.link. Remember, this is just the domain name that I own, right? So don't think, oh, I have to type ECS. This should be whatever domain name you are using. I'm good with all port ranges right now. I'm going to allow shareable service networks, share resource configuration, that I don't need to do any of this. Everything else is good. So I'm going to go ahead and create that. Oops, I do need a name though. So we'll call this the ECS resource configuration. And we'll create that. And there you go. All right. So we've now created a share. So how do we take advantage of that? Well, to take advantage of that, we're going to go over to EventBridge. Okay. EventBridge has a new feature. So the feature itself is not new, but it has a new addition to the feature where we're going to go into connections. And the connections actually handle all of they maintain connections for you. And so they'll handle your OAuth, they'll handle everything. So we're going to create a connection. We're going to call this the ECS connection. And we're going to this is what's new. We're going to do a private connection, meaning we're not leaving the AWS backbone and coming back in. We're going to stay on the private connection. Now watch this. When I drop this down, there it is. There's the resource configuration that we created. So I'm going to choose that one. Configuration authorization. I do need custom because I need an API key because my app requires a secret key of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0. I know it does asterisks. I still say it. Okay. So we just created, maybe, hang on a second here. Come on. Create. Oh, yeah, my key was blocking that. So, all right. So one thing to understand, time-wise, we're okay. This is authorized. We need that to say active, and it's going to take 5 minutes for that to do that. So while we do that, we're going to set up something else to actually test this. We're going to set up our step functions to test on this. Okay, so hopefully we'll just leave that in place, and I'm going to go over here and open my step functions, and we'll create a new step function right here. Choose from blank, same as we did before. So we'll call this an ECS caller, right? Because that's, there you go. All right, so I'm going to do continue. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually use the HTTPS APIs, the state. Okay, so this actually manages this. So in here, all I need is that HTTPS, and I'm going to do ecs.slip.link. Remember, that's matching all the way through. We're doing a get to get information from that, but I can do, obviously all the other ones. And finally, when I do connection, looky there, ECS connection. That's the one we created. You can see I've got some others. I have a lot of baggage. That's pretty good. I like that. There it is. Okay. Nobody's responding to that. Okay. All right. Okay. So I don't need to send anything. So I'm going to go ahead and create this. It's going to need to do, okay, we're making sure we have all, and it's saying it's creating them. So we're good there. Confirm, and we're created. Let's check the status of our connection. So it's still authorized. We need it to be active. So let's see if they've got any questions or anything else when we're doing this. So
no, not at the moment yet. But so basically, this is using private link, but it's also using VPC lattice. And sort of VPC lattice is this network connectivity where you can connect different AWS accounts together without having to go through all the VPC shenanigans of peering and all those kind of things.
That's a great word, shenanigans. So, but that's correct. It allows you to bypass without losing. I mean, security is number one, right? Without losing the security, so you're keeping it all in the network backbone, and you're connecting those the private API. So basically, this connector, this VPC lattice, is now the proxy, but you don't have to bring anything up to do it, right? You just make that connection and share that out. And what's really cool, and we're not going to have time to do that in this one, this has a couple more minutes, is I can actually share this with another account, right? Inside my org or outside my org. You remember when I was doing those settings and say allow, sharing? Yes, I'm going to allow that. And so what I do is I use the resource access manager. And that actually, and I can show you that real quick before we run out of time. So if I go into resource access manager, I can actually do this. So we'll create a resource share. The resource type we're going to do is a resource config, because that's what we created. So here's our resource configuration. It now lists the ones you have, and there's the gateway that we're going to do. Then what I would have to do is I go over here and, I need to name it. So let's go RAM ECS, and I go next. And I don't need a custom manage permission. I could go in and do that, but I'm okay with the default. So I'm going to go next. Then the final thing I do here is I actually choose, and I don't have my account handy, so we won't worry about this, but I actually choose the account or the org or the organizational unit or the IAM role or the user, whatever that I want to share this with. And then it would create what's called an invite, a RAM invite. Then I would go into the new account that I created go into the resource access manager, and I would check and I would accept that. And once I accept that, then they're connected, and either one of those can delete that.
Cool.
Right? So, okay. So let's
Carson Black, thanks for joining us via YouTube. Can this be used to connect to an external API that requires a static IP for whitelisting?
Yeah, you can. So you really don't even. So when we say external, you mean outside AWS?
Yes.
So I'm going to assume you mean the EventBridge connection. Yes, you can. The EventBridge connection can point to any API that you want it to. And what you do is you can actually have it authorized and keep that authorization.
But if you need because you need to have a static IP address that the third party is then going to authorize you from coming from that IP address. So yeah, I'm not, because you haven't got control of what the IP address of this is. So I think you would need to. Sorry, you would then need an elastic IP.
Yeah. No, you couldn't. You wouldn't be able to do that this would not hold a static IP.
Yeah. So, but then you could route it out of a elastic IP via an endpoint or something. So.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So we're
at a minute to go.
Okay, a minute to go. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and execute this. Now, if this doesn't work, I did it all from memory, but I'll fix it. So, all right, let's go ahead and run it. And it's calling the HTTP API. And it did it. Oh, it did it. Boom. Okay, let me go here.
What a pro.
And there's your response right here.
That's the definition.
Right. Yeah. Oh, that's the definition. Thank you. And here's the response from the API.
Fantastic.
Right to the wire.
Right to the wire, and it all worked first time. Great job. And you aren't even an AI assistant doing this. You're actually a human. So good on you.
That's right. Yeah.
Eric,
call me Eric.
Super great. We're going to be obviously diving, I think it's 2 or 3 weeks time, we're going to be diving into it. And next week, actually, on Serverless Office Hours, we are talking all about the world of Kafka and provision mode. So this is going to be also another deep dive, talking all about cool techniques for using Lambda and Kafka together, and a new provision polars, which is going to do stuff really faster for you as well. Eric, so appreciate you spending time with us in Serverless Office Hours yet again.
Of course.
The coding guru is with us, so appreciate it. Everybody who joined on the live stream, thanks so much. We so enjoy spending time with us from wherever you come from across the world. Same time, same place next week. See you then. Bye-bye.
Bye.